Mr. Speaker, at every stage of my life, whether as a high school student, a university student, a young Rastaman, a Black Power militant, a lecturer at the university, or an elected representative of the people, and now as the leader of this great party, the People's National Party, I have always been motivated by the desire to serve my fellow Jamaicans. Service has meant sharing their lives and helping them in every possible way to realize their hopes and their aspirations. Together, we will continue to work to build a Jamaica in which every citizen, regardless of class, color, race, or religion, has access to the same opportunities for personal upliftment and for the fullest realization of their personal talents. Mr. Speaker, as I listened to the Minister of Finance last week, I found myself reflecting on the discussions I've been having with the Jamaican people in many walks of life, in their districts, in their communities, in the town centers across our beautiful island. I listen to their concerns as they relate the stresses of daily life, the worry about not making ends meet. I hear the same concerns from our teachers and other public servants, the police, the men and women buying in the markets and those selling in the markets. I see the despair in the eyes of our farmers and the young men who see no options, the small business owners struggling to survive, and the single mothers who shoulder life alone on behalf of their children. My presentation today is for them. It is a duty to be the voice for those Jamaicans who are excluded from the official narrative which was presented last week. The budget presented by the Minister of Finance brought to mind the first lines of the famous novel by Charles Dickens, The Tale of Two Cities, in which he said, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. The official story, the official narrative given by the minister would say in effect that this is now the best of times. But at best, that story is an incomplete story. And at worst, that story, the official narrative, is a distortion of the reality experienced by far too many of our people. Therefore, my presentation will concentrate on the people's experience. However, let me first commend the current administration for maintaining fundamental aspects of the economic reform program that they inherited from us. Before proceeding to Mr. Speaker, let me particularly welcome the members of the diplomatic corps who have taken time out to be here. The question of the administration's continuation of the economic reform program was dealt with, I believe, extensively and brilliantly by the Shadow Minister of Finance and Planning, the member from South St. Andrew, last Tuesday. The progress made on the economic reform program, which was started in 2013, has continued in critical areas. The debt is further down. That's a good thing, the public debt. Job creation has continued. That's a good thing. Some economic growth has been sustained, and the revenues are up. I note with particular satisfaction the increase in revenues that, as has been pointed out already, has come as a result of the comprehensive tax reform efforts that were put in place between 2013 and 2016. We strengthened the administrative powers of Tax Administration Jamaica. We passed legislation to access third-party information and introduced transfer price rules. We put in place measures to incentivize the productive sectors and improve the rate of return on investment. An amendment was made to the Customs Act, which reduced duties on commodities and eliminated duties on all productive inputs. We reformed the incentives regime to level the playing field for all sectors of the economy. We must now examine whether the budget presented will use these increased revenues to improve the quality of life for the majority of Jamaicans. A careful reading of the budget shows a lack of understanding of the workings of the economy, and even more painful, a lack of appreciation for the day-to-day realities faced by ordinary Jamaicans. The minister announced a $14 billion tax giveback as the major component of a stimulus program. The question is, who will get the tax giveback? Will it be the majority of those who made the sacrifices 6 years ago to initiate the economic reform program which enabled these increased revenues? Will it include the public sector workers whose sacrifice included a 5-year wage freeze, 2 years with the previous JLP administration and 3 years under the economic reform program that started in 2013. The financial sector also played their part, and the pensioners paid their part. And you know, Mr. Speaker, the pensioners' contribution I liken to the widow's mite that we all learnt about in Sunday school. Because while in absolute terms for each pensioner it may have been a small amount as compared to the bankers who gave up interest, it was a greater share of their income than it was for the bankers. It was a contribution that they could scarcely afford, given that pension increases had been flat over those years. Those are the people who made these sacrifices, and those are the ones who should be first in line when the chance came for a giveback. The benefits that derive from the national economy should be shared by all the people. It shouldn't read like a friends and family discount, just going to one segment of the investor community. The role of the economic reform program, together with the sacrifices of the Jamaican people to restore Jamaica's financial stability, shouldn't be taken lightly. I still recall the situation that existed before we embarked upon the reform program. Jamaica had experienced 12 consecutive quarters of negative growth. Debt, which was 107% of GDP in 2007, was climbing. The then JLP administration had effectively abandoned the 2010 IMF program after just 1 year. They missed the majority of the deadlines and the structural benchmarks thereafter. Poverty levels doubled from 9.9% in 2007 to over 18% in 2011. Jamaica had lost credibility in the international financial markets, and in fact some were describing us as being on the way to becoming a failed state. The road at the beginning of the economic reform program was particularly difficult. I had to face the IMF, the IDB, the World Bank, and others who doubted that we had a capacity or a willingness do the reforms. There was a loneliness that I often felt when negotiating the best deal for Jamaica, when there were others, some on that side, who were saying, sign now, sign at any cost, as our reserves declined. They said, take any deal on offer. After successfully renegotiating the IMF agreement and re-establishing Jamaica's credibility by consistently passing the test, they started to sing another tune. And them say, all we could do is pass IMF tests. Could we have gotten this far to where we are today without passing those IMF tests? Look at what I have come to say. Those who were criticizing yesterday are now the same ones reaping the fruit today and rejoicing. But is love still? Nothing is wrong. As they say, Paul planted, Apollonius watered, and God Almighty gave the increase. So we are happy for Jamaica's sake. But the important lesson is that we got here on the basis of a national consensus. And that consensus, if I am to talk the truth, you are here at the consensus as someone who came late to the party. No, I never talked to you. I talked to him. There is enough stones coming to you. Don't take up his own. We were able to mobilize this national support because of the confidence of the people and what they had in our commitment and capacity to deliver. While all segments participated, let there be no doubt that it was the workers, the pensioners, and other consumers who bore the brunt of the tax packages that were then imposed. And the poorest bore the greatest burden, Mr. Speaker. In light of this, it is a travesty of justice that those who sacrificed the most in bringing the economic reform program into being are not getting any direct benefit from this tax giveaway. The budget presented by Santa Clark, the Minister of Finance, gives us little comfort in the fact that it excluded the majority of Jamaicans. That is not how you build a Jamaica that works for all. In sharp contrast to the minister's official narrative of the best of times, the reality is that our hospitals are overcrowded and under-equipped, and too many of our people, old and young, have suffered from the mismanagement, and some have died from the mismanagement of the recent dengue epidemic. The people's reality is that food prices are becoming increasingly unaffordable. In the cook shop like the one Miss D runs, the size of the box lunch that she prepares is being reduced as she tries to hold prices, but she can't keep up the same supply of food in the lunchbox. The official narrative doesn't reflect that aspect of the people's reality, Mr. Speaker. Tanisha, a nurse, tells me at the supermarket that the dollar can't stretch. As she reaches the cashier, she's embarrassed to have to put back some things. And Mas Harris says the same thing happened to him. He is a pensioner. The official narrative won't tell you that. Gas prices for motorists are higher today, even though oil is at $58 a barrel. Almost half of what it was in 2013 when oil was at $98 a barrel. The official narrative is silent on that. The official narrative also won't tell you that last year Jamaica had the 5th highest murder rate in the world, and that most people don't feel secure. Half of the city of Kingston is regularly today without free-flowing water supply. On top of all of this is the reality of mismanagement and corruption. In this debate, Mr. Speaker, we have to recognize the experiences of the overwhelming majority of Jamaican people who every day are struggling to make ends meet. We must do this because the official narrative leaves them out. There must be a better way. The official narrative set out by the minister won't tell us that Marcia, the bank teller, finds it hard to get to work and to get our children to school, while we allow the public transportation system to run down. It won't tell you that of those employed, over 700,000 are at or near the minimum wage and are quickly losing hope of the prospect of a livable wage. And these persons have families who depend on them. We can all easily agree that some work is better than no work. But when we look closely at the employment numbers, what we find is that the greatest share is in the BPO sector, under rent and construction activities, building activities. But the next significant segment of those employment numbers that have grown includes what they call other community, social and personal activities. People engaged in vending, car washing, window wiping. Yeah. We call this, in reality, the hustling sector in the country. I've been long here. These are not the signs of the kind of economic development that we seek, and they are not the signs of economic development that economists usually point to. We have to look beyond the figures. It is also of significance in relation to the BPO sector, as former Prime Minister Bruce Golding pointed out recently in an article in the press, that of a sample taken of recent UWI graduates, the average wage earned by 25% of the graduates was $50,000 a month, and 75% earned under $100,000. And were unable to meet their student loan obligations satisfactorily. How did they start life and raise families? Even some of those who are working, the working poor, are one prescription bill away, or one kidney dialysis away, or one other medical event away from abject poverty and crisis in their lives. Now, while some jobs have been created, let us not lose sight of the fact that there are some 474,000 Jamaicans between the age of 15 and 55 who are not seeking work and not working. So while Johnny and Marie might get a short-term job, Mikey and Dottie are outside of the labor force. Where are they in this budget narrative? What is provided for them in the official narrative that we were presented with? All these people were hoping that the budget presented by the minister would have better explained their present hardships and presented real opportunities for their lives. Simply put, their lives are not headed in the right direction. There must be a better way. Not only is the official narrative out of touch with the people's reality, but it is also woefully out of touch with the growth realities of the economy. No matter how you want to nice it up, Minister, if 5 in 4 was abandoned last year, this year the budget buries it. We are now in year 4. And you talk about 1.5% growth. Growth next year is predicted by the fiscal policy paper to be lower than growth this year. No better proof exists of the failure of the administration to deliver meaningful growth than their abandonment of the 5 in 4 mantra. Remember the launch? Remember all the pepper lights? No, but it's true. The failure to grow the economy is not only being confirmed by the international community, but what it shows is that the gains previously made in creating a propitious, a favorable investment environment in the country are being squandered. Those gains are being squandered. Over the past year, Jamaica's ranking has fallen on critical global indices. The ease of doing business ranking prepared by the World Bank, Jamaica fell from 70 to 75. Forbes Best Countries for Business report, Jamaica fell from 72 to 80. On Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, we fell from 68 to 70. And in the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Report, Jamaica's fell from 70 to 79. That is not heading in the right direction. That is heading the wrong way. So, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the hardship of the majority of the Jamaican peoples, and the likelihood that growth will remain anemic, there is much mismanagement. In fact, the youth in Maxfield Park, them don't say mismanagement, them say damagement. And that is what is occurring. Take the issue of road construction. We left a financed program of road construction together with a process of consultation and a template of coordination to facilitate implementation of road construction with minimum disruption. This process is what made the implementation of the Portmore Highway construction take place without disruption. We were able to accommodate the traveling public, accommodate all the commercial enterprises, large and small, including the Portmore fishing village that was on the causeway. Under this administration, the implementation of the road construction program has become an albatross around the necks of both the traveling public and businesses alike. That is not management, that is damagement. Who would contemplate locking down every major thoroughfare in the corporate area at one time? And when the decision was taken to lock them down, there was no provision either for pedestrians or motorists, not dialogue with the business operators in the areas affected so that they could benefit from their views as to how best to do it. More damagement. And to make matters worse, the required coordination between the National Works Agency, the implementing agency, and the contractors, and the other affected enterprises seem to have been non-existent. This coordination between the agencies within government and the businesses outside government, like the telephone the providers, internet providers, seem to have been non-existent. Imagine the inconsistency of trying to secure economic growth and simultaneously closing down the businesses along Constant Spring Road, Hartley Park Road, 3 miles, and around the Portia Simpson Miller Square. Madness. Employees have had to be getting to work, arriving tired and frustrated as a result of the inept scheduling. JUTC can't complete their routes because of the traffic piles. The daily dust on Constant Spring Road make everyone sick, and especially the asthmatics suffer. Gas stations have closed. Businesses have had to relocate. Doctors' offices and other businesses have had to operate on an itinerant basis. People operate with cell phone out of their pocket because the telephones at their business places don't operate. Where do I recall there that the late Brother Clark experience when they cut down one bamboo tree illegally, and the dislocation it was said to have caused? One bamboo tree. In contrast, there was no apology from this administration for all the chaos and damagement that they have visited at the Too many people are faced with emergencies, including medical emergencies. In this gridlock, nobody seems to care, and you're telling us that you're heading in the right direction. It's not the first time that we're building roads in Jamaica. I remember when I was Minister of Transport and Works, we did 4 roads, Malines Road, 4 roads to Boulevard at 6 Mile. No such dislocation. We did Hope Road, Ligani to King's House Gate. No such dislocation and chaos. Let us not forget that the buck for this mismanagement stops with the office of the Prime Minister. That is not just the businesses closing down, but when you look at it, because of putting up an overpass, you disrupt the water main coming from Spanish Town to Kingston. Who is in charge here? And then in trying to repair the damage of the original one, you damage the replacement again. More damage. Mr. Speaker, I feel particularly affected by this because the people in Hagley Park Road are part of my constituency. I share a good part of Hagley Park Road. And the residents, as well as the businesses, have been without adequate water supply for months. In fact, you have some too? You have some too? Yes, yes. We're spending most of the time the last few months getting water trucked to schools, to basic schools, to people, to residential communities, satisfying businesses. Quite frankly, I believe there is a case for legal action to be taken by many of those businesses against the state. Some of them have gone out of operation. I want to thank the Water Commission because truthfully they have tried in difficult circumstances and they have been responsive. I don't think the problem rests with them. The problem is a lack of ministerial oversight and a lack of coordination as the contractors and some of the agencies seem to be a law unto themselves. What? Lack of, well, the member from South St. Andrew spoke about the problem of the inflated Ministry of, what you call it, Economic Growth and Job Creation. He called it the Wagga Wagga Ministry, because it is impossible to give the kind of oversight. We know the circumstances of the public sector. Lots of these things require direct ministerial oversight and involvement. Without it, the system runs awry. It may have been a good thought, but when you notice that it's not working, wheel and come again. That is what leadership should involve. Mr. Speaker, in this catalogue of mismanagement, forgive me if I single out what appears to be a deliberate attempt to allow the JUTC to run down. I feel particularly strongly about this one because Jamaica spent a lot of resources in buying out the previous operations when we had the one-man, one-bus system. Don't forget what that system was when the cry was no schoolers and the little children had to stand at the back of the line, and we had people, we had young students murdered, dying for no other reason than for trying to get on the bus. But now, what do we have? Over the past 2 years, more than 100 buses at JUTC have been taken out of service due to lack of maintenance. Fare revenues have fallen by over $1 billion in the period between 2016 and 2018. Projected losses of the JUTC for 2019-20 are estimated at $9 billion, the highest ever. The Ministry of Finance is providing some support to make up this loss, but what they are providing is not sufficient to make it up. At the same time, there seems to be a free-for-all in the grant of licenses for taxis and others, which is going to have the effect of causing more pressure on the company. It is going to have the effect of further running down the company and returning us to the day when what you will have is no viable public transport system for a city of 1 million people as we have in the Kingston metropolitan.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
No modern city. Mr. Speaker, there is no plan to return the JUTC to financial viability. And the point simply is that a modern city with a productive economy cannot do without an effective public transportation. Mr. Speaker, I believe, if your memory still serves you, you have experience, you have a recollection of the 1980s. All of us forget sometime. Mr. Speaker, no ill intent is intended. All of us forget sometime. There are things Carl said that he doesn't even remember now. Mr. Speaker, a word to the wise should be sufficient. Prime Minister, don't allow the JUTC to disappear and mash up again. The country spent too much to get where we are. Health is yet another area that is afflicted by poor management. Healthcare delivery at the Cornwall Regional Hospital, despite repeated assurances of its repair, is still below acceptable standards. At the Bustamante Children's Hospital, there have been approximately 200 less procedures done in 2018 than they did in 2016. Not because there were 200 fewer children in need of procedures, but because of the decline in capacity to do these procedures at the Children's Hospital. At the Kingston Public Hospital, it's now operating, Mr. Speaker, they say at 110% of bed capacity. What that means that approximately 1 in 10 of the patients at the institution doesn't have a bed to lie down in. That's what it means. They're sleeping in wheelchairs, on benches, and even on the floor. This is not only happening at KPH, it's happening at Savlamar, Maypen, Sentence Bay, and at other hospitals as well. Mr. Speaker, there must be a better way. All across the health system, we see evidence day after day that the free healthcare policy is an illusion. Because when you present yourself there, you can't go further in the system to get the treatment that you need. Were it not for the patriotism and the professionalism of the doctors, nurses, and the other medical professionals, and the health workers, and the health administrators, the whole system would have crashed by now. There must be a better way, Mr. Speaker. When you look at agriculture, you see the evidence of the damagement again. For us on this side, a fundamental weakness of the budget that has been presented is the failure to recognize that the rebuilding of the rural economy must be a critical cornerstone of any inclusive model of economic growth. It is also a pathway to wealth creation for rural families. The collapse of export agriculture, and in particular sugar, and the failure to modernize domestic agriculture has left the majority of Jamaicans who live in rural Jamaica facing poverty, and has opened the doors for the proliferation of crime throughout rural Jamaica. Agriculture accounts for some 250,000 jobs and represents 7.5% of the GDP. Average wage and average income in agriculture is lower than in the other sectors of the economy. And unless you solve the problem of agricultural incomes and rural incomes, you won't effectively tackle the problem of poverty overall nationally. In the official narrative, we are told that agriculture is humming at 5% growth. But this is below the potential of the sector. The truth is also that when you look at our major export sectors, what we are seeing is the crisis in agriculture. The food import bill is surging again. $1 billion. We have tried to reduce it. This represents effectively a transfer of wealth from rural Jamaica to overseas farming communities. The crisis in our sugar industry is deepening. The closure in Monimus of the factory has resulted in some $30 million less per fortnight being spent in the South Clarendon communities. The bars, the supermarkets, the corner shops down there have been closed. Westmoreland, another major sugar producing parish where the cane farmers are bearing the brunt of that crisis. Frome is open. But because of the new arrangements, they are not certain they are going to be in production next year. They have received one payment. They don't know what the final payment is going to be. Both of these parishes, Mr. Speaker, Westmoreland traditionally has been carried by tourism and by sugar and by some domestic agriculture. When sugar falls out, as it has, nothing else is picking up the slack. And a portion of the people are turning to other activities, including criminal activities. And the same thing is happening in Clarendon. That's why both of those parishes are having spikes in criminal activity and in violent activity. And yet there is no plan. For 2 years we were told all kinds of nice things going to happen to sugar. Nothing. After 2 years. No plan, no specific message to the cane farmers in Westmoreland whether they should plant or not plant next year. We hear that there is going to be a great plan for South Clarendon. Lands are going to be divested. But how? And what is the plan? And indications are that the crisis in sugar is going to deepen because the Duckenfield factory in St. Thomas is going to close as well. And then the crisis is going to spread. Look at coffee. 3 years ago, farmers were getting $12,000 a box for Blue Mountain coffee beans. The last crop coffee was being purchased for around $3,000 a box, little more. Clearly our farmers can't buy fertilizer, pesticide, and all that goes into producing the crop if they're earning only $3,000 per box. Nor can they take care of the needs of their families for education, health, etc. on this reduced income. While there has been some response from the private sector, there has been precious little response from government, and no indication that there's a plan to intervene, even to even out prices to the farmers in the market. The government's indifference to rural Jamaica is much the same as what we are seeing affecting the commuting public in urban Jamaica. While the farmers are suffering and their coffee beans are rotting on the ground, we're still importing coffee in the country for specialty coffee. It would be better even if we were buying the Blue Mountain coffee at a lower price and stopping the coffee from coming in than allowing the crop to be lost entirely. Right. What about exploring plans for some form of crop insurance to store, as they tell us in the good book, store the coffee in the times of plenty. Right. So when there are times of shortage, you can even out. No, but crop insurance work. It will cost you something, but it will cost you less than the social damage caused in the communities for the We can control the markets. Why should we not insist that the only coffee served in our hotels is Blue Mountain coffee and not some of the concoctions that they have? so that every visitor coming to Jamaica can get a chance to taste the best coffee in the world and not keep importing from other countries. It needs some imagination. Leadership is not just PR. It means hard work and ideas. When it comes to cocoa, we have the same story of mismanagement. Jamaicans know that our cocoa is among the best cocoa in the world. In fact, Jamaica cocoa is designated, along with some other Caribbean cocoas, as fine flavor cocoa in the international market. We get a premium price for ours as compared to that grown in, say, Ivory Coast or Ghana. Yet, what is happening in this area is that with the introduction of Jacra, you have a situation where the cocoa farmers are able to negotiate higher prices than the price at which cocoa is being sold by the Ministry of Agriculture. We are losing as compared with what was negotiated in Grenada or what was negotiated in Trinidad, where they're getting $5,000 US a ton, and where our cocoa farmers have negotiated in excess of $4,000. We are selling cocoa for $3,000 US a ton, and it is cocoa as good or better than that which is for which $5,000 is being paid to Grenada and to Trinidad. Something wrong. Something dreadfully wrong. That, Mr. Speaker, is not management. That is damagement of the cocoa farmers. Mr. Speaker, as bad as the mismanagement has been, as bad as the JUTC management has been, and the management in the health services, and the problems with agriculture, they all pale in comparison to the rampant levels of barefaced corruption that have been taken. The news over the past year has detailed the gross mismanagement and corruption that took place in Petrojam and the associated agencies of the Ministry of Science, Energy and Technology, including National Energy Solutions and the Universal NESAL and the Universal Service Fund. The dimensions of the Petrojam scandal itself are just absolutely mind-boggling. $18 billion for oil losses. Directors reimbursed millions of dollars for travel not taken. Nepotism in the hiring of staff. Put it another way, nepotism might confuse people. Simply put, people hiring friends and family, usually unqualified, at the public expense. The breach of procurement rules resulting in overspending nearly $100 million for a wall that was initially estimated to cost $29 million. In fact, in the Western Hemisphere, Mr. Speaker, the only wall more expensive is in Texas.
Oh dear.
The country still can't get over the 4-tiered topsy-turvy chocolate cake for 1,000 US. So this topsy-turvy cake was in early 2018, and it was followed by the famous or infamous Wakanda party, dancing girls and all. Prime Minister, none of the ministers who attended the party never come back and say, boss, that's not right. Close it down. Something is going wrong. Not one never come and tell you. There is the case of an employee with more political connections than qualifications, who was terminated with a golden handshake for poor performance. Was it payment?
No, I wasn't there.
Then there was the question of the misrepresentation of the same golden handshake in the parliament for the Human Resource Director. Misrepresentation of the facts regarding the plans for Petrojam, including its valuation. The list goes on and on. When you think about the harsh reality of life faced by the majority of Jamaicans, any government that supervised the travesty where $35 million was paid to one individual who was not qualified for the job over a year, and $35 million was found under the bed of another employee at Nessal. Any government that supervised that is just callous and uncaring. $70 million between two people. Imagine how much hospital bed that could buy. Imagine police car that could buy. Imagine school furniture that could buy. Instead, money was being diverted into the pockets of a few for their own personal prosperity. And you know, Mr. Speaker, from all reports, it's not done yet. But even more, we shouldn't forget what transpired over the 3 years that the government has been in power. It started before year one had been completed with the bushing scandal. Then there was the police used car scandal, the firearm licensing scandal, the $17 million welcome sign, the missing funds at Duns River Fall, the misuse of funds at the Student Bureau. You know, Mr. Speaker, I ask myself all the while, why is only the scandal bag that them ban? Them should ban the whole bag of scandal. Mr. Speaker, it's so bad that the international agencies are taking note. Just last week, the review team of the IMF found it necessary to publicly comment on the levels of corruption in the country. They are usually very circumspect. When you see them go there, you know that the cup run over and them can't keep quiet no longer. Yet you say we're going in the right direction. This thieving and mismanagement of public funds must stop. Let's look, Mr. Speaker, at what is being proposed at Bernard Lodge. In the 1980s, these lands were part of the Agro 21 project. Extensive underground irrigation infrastructure was put in place with the assistance of USAID, I believe it was, as part of the drive to get Jamaica into winter vegetable production. That infrastructure is now valued at tens of billions of dollars. The irrigation wells were rehabilitated a few years ago at a cost of $6 billion borne by the Jamaican taxpayer. For over a decade, some 200 farmers, some with lease agreements, some who occupy lots with the knowledge of the National Land Agency, have been farming these lands. They are now being told that they will be removed to make way for a chosen few who will be the beneficiaries of a new Bernard Lodge development plan. One of these farmers, a 25-year-old youth named Poochie. So them call him.
You know the funny thing,
Actually, I believe he's originally youth, 25-year-old, originally hailed from St. Mary. I don't know West also. I don't know. A Jamaican.
That's right.
He maintains 140 acres, trying youth. He supplies callaloo to an agro-processor for export and onions, which he sells to a mother farm. He recently signed a contract to supply cassava to Red Stripe. He had just cleared his land to plant the cassava and is given notice to quit. He will be approved. This is the action of an administration that presents a budget that says it supports agriculture to help farmers grow. The issues at Bernard Lodge raise profound questions of policy and procedure.
That's right.
We know that a development plan was prepared, but there was no participation of the farmers. And you know, there is a fundamental difference between us on this side and those on that side. We will forever set our standard by the politics of participation. We believe in inclusion, dialogue, consultation with the stakeholders of the country affected by our policies. No dialogue with the farmers. There was no advertising of the properties as was required by the 1997 procedures for land divestment. Have those procedures changed?
No.
Is there not to be transparency?
Should.
How were the new purchasers selected? On what basis? Were the farmers given any opportunity to participate in the purchase of the lands? All the lands were sold before any land agreement has been formalized, and without any tender process. We understand that a large part is to be taken out of agriculture to be used for housing and commercial purposes. The public and we demand to know what's the status of these lands? Have they been sold? Are they being advertised? Is there a tender process underway? The next thing we need to know is what is the role of NEPA? In the past, when private developers applied for housing permits for these lands, NEPA always objected on the basis that it constituted an environmental hazard, including the damage to the water table and the threat of saltwater intrusion. Has there been a change in NEPA's position, and on what basis? Because we still know that the foremost underground water experts, the foremost hydrologists in the country, also continue to object to it. What is happening there appears to be a travesty. You cannot create an economy that is more inclusive by marginalizing innovative people from the mainstream of economic life. The farmers out there are the very people that ought to be encouraged if you want to reach your growth targets. What the Bernard Ladd saga seems to confirm is that the policy in place now is for prosperity for a few connected people and leaving the others out of the system. Let me serve notice that we have received a request from the farmers to take up their cause and in support of justice and fair play. We are making a formal demand that the government remove the roadblocks that have been put in place to deny the farmers access to their crops. My God, man, they have crops on the land, allow them to take them off so they can reap the crops for the benefit of their families. And reverse the decision to transfer control of the property to a few without any open, transparent process. Invite the fullest participation of the farmers in preparation of the new development plan. This is a pattern, you know. It's not the first time this is happening. No. This is a pattern. We see it in the treatment of the vendors at Constant Spring Market. We see it in the destruction of the coffee crops of the farmers Blue Mountain in St. Thomas. We see it also in what has been happening at the Mount Nelson property in central Manchester and the Bullhead property in central Manchester. What we're seeing is that the many who are farming and trying are being moved off to satisfy some other objective without their consultation. It is moving in the wrong direction. Mr. Speaker, it is commonplace in societies like ours that corruption feeds crime, and mismanagement has often been a cloak for corruption. Under this administration, all three have grown hand in hand. If we look at murders over the last 10 years, we see that during the administration of 2008 to 2011, there was an average of 1,470 murders per year. In the period between 2012, during the tenure of the previous administration of the People's National Party, the average was 1,128. And then post-2016, the average again has increased to 1,429 per year. Why is this so? Part of the problem has been the limitation on resources. When the mobility of the police force became a crucial factor in crime fighting, the response was to provide the used cars. The member from Central Manchester pointed out then that there was no police force anywhere else in the world that was using used cars.
None.
But put that aside, we still haven't got the cars. And as a consequence, the mobility of the force was compromised. After the problem with the mobility, there's no doubt that the morale of the force took a blow. We kept saying during the wage negotiations for the public sector, take the police out of the line, put them at the head of the line, recognize their centrality at this point in time. Our advice wasn't taken. Instead, they were left to the very end, asked to work way in excess of normal hours, which left them over 2 years without any increase in compensation. Even as the crime wave placed the lives of the Jamaican people at risk, the priority was not to spend the funds to equip the police force. In fact, budgets were tightened because of the $18,000 a month giveaway, the 1.5 promise. There was also, in addition, Mr. Speaker, the problem of outstanding legislative measures. You know, when you look at the throne speech, last year the promise to pass the legislation to merge Police Civilian Oversight Authority and the Police Services Commission. It never happened. This year, it's in the throne speech again. We will see what will happen this year. But those legislative measures would have been critical for the reform of the police force in order to do some of the things that need to be done. Given the improved availability of resources of which the minister speaks, how do we explain the low numbers on the ground to combat the present crime wave? Why is the administration not using the Zozo more in the affected areas, not just in St. James, but in Clarendon, Westmoreland, other parts of the conflict area? Why not? Mr. Speaker, Zozo provides for deployment of joint security forces, police and soldiers together on the ground. It gives the security forces the same powers of a state of emergency to detain suspects, search and cordon, etc. The only additional power of that the state of emergency provides is the ability to detain indefinitely without recourse to the courts. And we contend that this is a step too far. It creates animosity and division between the security forces and community, but also it infringes upon the rights of the citizen. Prime Minister, expand the Zozos immediately. In addition to the Zozos, we need a more effective crime-fighting plan, which includes amending the legislative framework and building the national consensus. Unfortunately, on both counts, the administration has been delinquent. Notwithstanding the divisive and partisan comments about a vote for the PNPs, a vote for criminals, we all agreed to meet because we are committed to the safety and security of all Jamaicans. When we met at Vale Royal on January 7th, we had agreed that the Attorney General and the opposition spokesperson on justice would meet to look at possible legislative measures. That the date for that meeting was set, I believe, on Tuesday last, and they met on Wednesday. And I am told that the meeting went well, that took place between the Senator Scott Motley, who is here, and her team, and the Honorable Attorney General. So there is a start. But we had also further agreed that in the effort to build a consensus, we were going to meet on January 16th. The date was set. It was agreed that we wanted to build this consensus, and we are going to start a national dialogue with the churches, the private sector, the human rights groups, the trade unions, the NGOs. That meeting is yet to take place. Mr. Prime Minister, set the date. We will come. It's not enough to just have the two of them meet or us meet. We need to build a national consensus to unite the country against criminality. To make matters worse, the Shadow Minister of National Security and member for South St. Catherine sought and received assurances from the Commissioner of Police that the security force presence would be maintained at the level that existed in St. James and the other areas where the state of emergency had existed following the ending of the statutory period. That was in keeping with our view that the essential ingredient for sustaining the reduction in criminal violence in those areas was to maintain the level of security force presence and the intensity of security force operations on the ground. Sadly, I must report to this House that my information is that the JDF presence in the parish of St. James is nearly 50% lower than it was during the state of emergency, 46% lower to be precise, and that the presence of the JCF is 40% lower than it was. No wonder there is an upsurge of criminal activity in the parish. And while the people of St. James are being left without adequate coverage from the security forces, the Minister of National Security, who seems to be embarked upon a plan which is to impugn the motives of the opposition and the People's National Party. We must do better than that, man. We have to do better than that. You have the powers to put the Zozo in place. Put the Zozos in place. You will get the joint command. You can further amend Section 9 of the Jamaica Defense Act to give more powers to the JDF if that is desired. But most of all, as government, you have the responsibility not to play politics with people's lives. We stand ready to give our support to any measure that will enhance national security without breaching the rights of the citizen. Therefore, let us build a national consensus around an effective crime plan that will unite the people and change their reality as far as criminal violence is concerned. Please, Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the root of the problem, which is the persistent inequality in our society. This is an inheritance of our history. There's no doubt. But it is a reality that must be confronted directly and defeated if we are to achieve the levels of inclusive growth needed to improve the quality of life for all Jamaicans. An objective assessment of the budget shows that it allocates available resources in a manner which deepens, not reverses, this inequality. It provides less than what is required to build a Jamaica that works for all. We on this side are committed to building a more equitable society in which poverty and social marginalization will no longer be the reality of the majority of the people, while a chosen, connected few enjoy prosperity. And there lies the distinction between an administration led by this side and the other side. It has always been the mission of the People's National Party, beginning with Norman Washington Manley, and carried more passionately during the during the administration of Michael Manley, and sustained by succeeding leadership to create a more equitable society. Equality and social justice have been the guiding light of the People's National Party from its foundation, and it remains so today. We have spent time since 2016 carefully reviewing our experiences as we sought to develop up the policy framework and programs to overturn and transcend the accumulated inequalities which have been part of our scarred history for years. First issue, Mr. Speaker, involves the inequalities in the ownership of land, that most precious resource, and which has been around for 180 years. The so-called 700 squatters of today's Jamaica are not worthless people who are not trying. 700,000 are not worthless people who are not trying. Rather, they are the descendants of those who have never been compensated or given a supporting hand for having suffered the ills and tribulations of their enslavement. I note with satisfaction that in the throne speech, the government relented from its position of the previous year and finally decided to undertake a study on squatting. Let me again repeat. The next PNP administration will, through a combination of legislative changes and administrative innovation, launch the most comprehensive program to address the plight of the landless in Jamaica. Time come now to put an end to the degradation of our fellow Jamaicans, which has been a feature of Jamaican life for nearly 2 centuries. Time come now for Jamaicans to no longer be wanderers in the land of their birth. Mr. Speaker, our determination to proceed on this path is not simply a moral consideration, although morality is important. Neither is it welfare, although caring is important. Yes. It is fundamental to economic development, and it is the cornerstone of social justice. The truth is, we will never secure the rates of economic growth that we all seek to deliver, nor will we deliver on the social justice that our people deserve, nor enjoy the social stability which we so urgently need if we do not squarely confront the problem of landlessness. The squatters in their communities would immediately upon getting title become participants in the mainstream of economic life, because land would not just be an asset, it would be capital in the real sense of the word that they could use. And that small farmer, the 60% of small farmers who don't own the land, don't have title to the land that they now work, would be able, by getting that piece of land, not only to be part of the Jamaican dream and have their place in their land in the sun, but they would also be able to use that piece of paper, buy the pump to get better irrigation, buy the pickup that can move their things to market, fix up their house to give better housing to the family. Mr. Speaker, it is an urgent challenge on which we should both be united to overcome the travails of our history. Similarly, the abolition of the apartheid, which defines our educational system, cannot be a gradual one. It is an urgent transformation which is needed now. There can be no higher priority than investing in the capacity of the children of those who sacrificed over the years. Unfortunately, the education budget in this year's estimates remains flat. When we left office, a program was being implemented to bring an end to the shift system. It would have ended by now. Equally urgent is a program to improve the outcomes in the underperforming schools in the secondary system. Quite frankly, this is something that is going to require not only consensus, it's going to require a national mobilization akin to what we achieved with Jamal when we mobilized the whole country to tackle illiteracy in the country and blunt its force once and for all. Now, Mr. Speaker, the challenge is a different one, to educate all those children who are being left behind. There must be a better way. Mr. Speaker, trickle down has never worked and will never work. Another distinguishing feature between us and others is that we don't subscribe to trickle-down theory on this side. That theory, simply put, states that if we create an enabling environment, and if we take care of the investors and business community, then as wealth develops, some of it will cascade down, some of it will trickle down and fall on the shoulders of those who have been left behind. It has never happened, and that is not our view of development. Let me make it clear, Jamaica needs investors of all sizes, big, small, in between. And it is for this reason that I work so hard to create a more favorable environment for investment, both local and foreign. Nor am I advocating a departure from fiscal prudence that I worked so hard and I dare say suffered so much to establish. However, building a Jamaica that works for all won't happen in a trickle-down economy. It is not trickle-down. It is not trickle-down that gave the people of Jamaica workers' rights or improved wages in 1938. It was the intervention of people like A.J.S. Coombs, Alexander Bustamante, Norman Manley and Ken Hill and others that struck a blow on behalf of the workers of the country as an urgent necessity of those times. It was not trickle-down that tackled the social injustices in the 1970s, that passed the legislation for minimum wage, maternity leave, right to pension, equal pay for equal work, equal pay for women. It was the intervention of a caring and visionary administration. Where we are today, we need that kind of action to take us forward at the pace we need to go. And what we know for sure is that the trickle-down approach won't cut it. In 2019, trickle-down will not stop employers from denying Jamaicans their rights under the false premise of contract work. Trickle-down will not put the 700,000 squatters on a pathway to home ownership. Trickle-down will not alleviate the poverty being experienced by the majority of our people. I'm not talking about the poverty rate now in the survey of living conditions. We have to decide what kind of country we want. What kind of country do we have when more than 54% of the children in the school system, primary and secondary, are there only because they are on PATH program? I am not objecting to the PATH program. We put it in place. But it says something about equality in a country when half your school population has to depend on public benefits. It says something about a country when you have 70% of your workforce, 60% earning minimum wage or close to it. It says something about the country when you have so many people in the working of the workers not being able to benefit from collective bargaining benefits, rights that have been won for them. What we want to do is to see an expansion of the stakeholder society, an expansion of entrepreneurship, which will result in the growth of micro, small, and medium-sized businesses to drive inclusive growth. We want to see public assets listed more on the stock exchange. I want to congratulate the stock exchange. We want to see more broad-based ownership. Big advocate of it. Yes, man. We're not afraid. But we never wanted ever to close it down. But I can tell you this. I am not afraid to say if I have made a mistake. I just move forward to a better way. One of the areas where inequity is most stark is the situation with the workers in this country. The widespread practice of substituting full-time employment that comes with real benefits, with so-called contract labor, which comes with none, deepens the inequality in our society. We all know of the situation which exists in relation to the government service, where you have hospital ancillary workers, porters, etc., and in the security sector with security guards. But this practice has become more widespread in the tourism sector. It has even extended into the manufacturing sector. Some of these contract workers have been employed for up to 5 years or more, according to some reports. I want to quote the following observation from an officer of the BITU report in the paper, which I believe is representative of the views of others as well. And I quote, "Contract work," he says, "doesn't make sense. Contract work is only supposed to be there when you have a short-term project doing. So nobody working in a hotel or as a security guard, unless you plan to close down the company tomorrow, not supposed to be working on contract." End of quote. As I have said before, the fact is that contract work denies the workers the rights and benefits that have been won for them by the trade union movement dating back to the days of Buster Manty, Ken Hill, Michael Manley, and Hugh Shearer, and others too numerous to mention. Contract workers don't have no vacation leave, so they can't afford to rest. Contract workers don't have sick leave, so they can't afford to get sick. Contract workers have no stipulated working hours, so they cannot afford to take a lunch break. They have neither collective bargaining rights nor do they have the protection against wrongful dismissals, so they can't afford an opinion. They will have no pension when they retire. Yet in every other respect, they are expected to be as productive and has invested in the work as another regular full-time employee. The next PNP administration will bring an end to the use of the contract system to abuse our work. You know, Mr. Speaker, this is an area which shows that as a country, we're moving backwards as far as solving the inequality in the society is concerned. You are a trade unionist, you have given your life to it, you too, and others in this house. The workers won many rights. There are complexities to the problem. And the fact is, in order to solve some of these complexities, we commissioned a Labour Market Reform Commission. The report has been completed almost 2 years now, but no action has been taken. Prime Minister, time to dust it off. Let the House consider it and let us put something in place. Make us, well, we can, no, we didn't. But nothing else. Nothing else. I believe we should put it immediately to a select committee. Let us consider it. Let's see what we can do. Just don't leave it there. People suffering now. And it is with our proposals for inclusive growth and sustained growth that I want to focus now. Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Minister of Finance has already exposed the inadequacies of the budget presented as far as Jamaica's inclusive growth agenda is concerned. He also identified the additional burdens that the budget has placed on those least able to bear them. I've often been advised that the opposition should not offer prescriptions to government. However, Jamaica is at such a critical stage that we can no longer stand by without informing both the public and the administration as to where Jamaica is headed in the wrong direction and show where there is a better way possible. This debate does not allow for a full presentation of our development agenda for Jamaica, but I would like to share some thinking on critical elements as to a way forward. Mr. Speaker, frankly speaking, the first and fundamental issue to be tackled is the rebuilding of the rural economy as the cornerstone for inclusive. The collapse of export agriculture, in particular sugar, and the failure to modernize domestic agriculture has left the majority of Jamaicans who live in rural Jamaica facing poverty and opened the doors to the proliferation of crime. Our plan for rebuilding rural Jamaica calls for the national mobilization of resources to provide quality education and training in order to create the kind of labor force that can modernize agricultural production in coffee, cocoa, cannabis, ginger, and other high-value crops. We propose to expand economic opportunities not just with agro-processing, but with community tourism, music centers, sports development centers in the rural economy, and other creative industries. Imagine, for example, take a place like, I was going to say Frankfield, where you have a school that has been winning girls' champs years after years after year, where they have some expertise where you could establish training facilities, get foreigners who want to learn to run fast to come there in the rural climate, and then the tourism, the construction would develop around that kind of facility. Think of out in the east where the music industry already is, where we can build performing arts centers so people can come. Rural economy don't just mean agricultural economy. It is a broader concept that we must deal with. We will provide jobs through climate change and adaptation and mitigation. And we will drive the knowledge and innovation industries in the rural areas as well. Secondly, as I indicated earlier, we will embark on a massive land titling program to allow for easier, speedier, and more affordable land ownership. That will make the announced reduction in transfer tax truly work for the majority of the Jamaicans. The land titling program will also be a critical plank in the rebuilding of the rural economy. This will facilitate the expansion of small enterprises. For the 60% of the farmers who hold no title for their land, we are going to link the provision of the title with the accessibility to finance so that the farmers can get title and get the finance. That is the better way, Mr. Speaker. Third is to drive private consumption. Private consumption accounts for about 80% of Jamaica's GDP. Hence, in the reduction of tax, consumption, the consumers need to get a break. Yes. Prime Minister, when you talk, if you don't do anything else, reduce the GCT. Do it. Give the consumers a break. But I wanted to add, no, him can wheel and come again. Talk to him. Do it. Talk to him. And take something off the gas as well. Remove the LC. The consumers need a break, and it will help you with your JUTC. It will help you. The only reason why we said no, because the poor can't take no more. Fourth, we will pass legislation requiring employers to treat so-called contract workers as full-time employees and give them the benefits of full-time employees. I said already that we need to get and consider and implement those desirable aspects of the Labour Market Commission report. But 6, we will immediately restore the policy to prioritize the export of alumina and cut down on the export of raw bauxite in the country. The value added that Jamaica gets from producing alumina is 3 to 4 times that which we get when we export just raw bauxite. We will reverse the policy, the present policy of expanding the bauxite reserves for those companies that have no intention to process alumina in Jamaica. And we will seek a return to the bauxite levy regime, which represents one of the best achievements of our country. By substituting profit sharing
which doesn't exist
for the levy regime, with one company alone, Jamaica's earnings declined by $4 billion US dollars in just 2 years. In that.
Give away.
4 billion J dollars. 4 billion J dollars. 4 billion J dollars.
You could have given 8 billion instead. Fix some roads.
Look here, we must not continue to learn lessons that we all have already learned. That is to stand still. The reason why we introduced the levy was because companies were gaming us over the years. It's the only guaranteed way. Peg it to the price on the London Metal Exchange and you know what you get. In relation to the social services,
Come on now.
and the educational system, and particularly in relation to the students' loans, while the reduction in interest rates is always helpful, we need to face the fact that too many students remain unemployed, or many students remain unemployed after graduation. And even when they are employed, a large number are not earning enough to repay the loans and live a decent life. As a consequence, and given the importance of tertiary education and development, we need more bold action. We will implement the decision to offer a First in Family Scholarship program so that the first child in every family gets a full scholarship once they matriculate. People say, don't do it. But look here, I want to make it plain. Our objective is to get back to the point. To get back to the point for everyone, where every student can get access to tertiary education without having to face the problem of it. So this is a halfway house, recognizing the fiscal difficulties of now. When I went to university, the end of the 60s, never had no fees. Most people got a bursary from the Ministry of Education, which made you almost rich on the campus. You used to own the soda fountain at the time, not own it, operate it. So up at university, yes. Those days, students could buy food. Nowadays, it's tough, and this meets some of their needs. We're going to abandon the requirement of a student loan guarantor. We can provide insurance scheme. The repayment of the loan will only begin when the graduates are employed, and the monthly repayments will be kept as a percentage of income. Students have to live. We want to prioritize the investment in the high schools to provide space for the over 20,000 students that are presently enrolled but are not in satisfactory conditions. We're going to expand the teacher training program to global standards to provide a trained teacher in every classroom in the shortest possible time. And Mr. Speaker, we believe that some, especially if you want to drive productivity improvements in the country, that firms who invest in approved training programs for their workers should be able to get some benefits in your tax method. And we believe that there should be an immediate investment of over 100 million additional on the health budget, so we put an end to people sleeping in wheelchair and bench and all kind of things. You want that in US? Talk to him. Mr. Speaker, I believe the time has come now to take action to recover the funds in the police used car scandal. Recover the funds so that they can be used. No, time to stop shilly-shallying about it. I don't know where it falls. Is the Minister of Security or is the Prime Minister? Recover the funds for the police used car that you haven't got. I hear you saying you're going to decide. Don't decide, don't ponder no more. Act now. I'm calling on the government to reverse the transfer of the Bernard Lodge lands out of the hand of the farmers. Too many public assets are being siphoned off without due process. I believe we need also to try to rebuild confidence in the political process by establishing some civil society oversight mechanism that would prevent the use of public funds being used for political purposes. To this end, I want to suggest the engagement of institutions like National Integrity Association, the churches, and others, to look at those agencies who seem to have an excess of cash and are being used as slush funds. Agencies that come to mind is like TEF, Chase, Civil Aviation, Universal Service Fund, and Petrojam. Let me say, Mr. Prime Minister, we can always have a dialogue about which agencies, but I think the principle which will give public confidence that their agencies are not just going to be used willy-nilly and pop up here and pop up there as if they're spending private funds rather than spending hard-earned taxpayer money. We need to build the assurance. I also believe that the time has come. I also believe that the time has come. Yes. Give him an orange tie. And always knew you're colorblind. I believe, Prime Minister, the time has come when we can find a system, particularly with some of our public enterprises which require specific technical expertise, UDC, Petrojam, and others, PCJ, where we can find qualified members of the general public, not necessarily known to any administration, where we select by way of advertising independent persons, some number on each of those boards, where the approval can be done by an independent body like the Public Service Commission, and where we will be assured that at least some members of the board represent a general public interest. A small country like ours doesn't have a vast expanse of technical expertise. We need to incorporate the general citizenry in the administration of things. Jamaica belongs to all the people, and we need to give them an opportunity to participate. And as I have said time and time again, our security forces and agencies like MOCA represent our last and most important line of defense against corrupt behavior and activity. And I would urge that the regulations for MOCA be brought forward immediately. They have been languishing for too long. I have every expectation, given the comments of the Minister of Finance, that there will be promises made when the Prime Minister speaks. And indeed, I think there are, it caused me to go back to look at some of the promises that had been made times past. I remember, for example, the promise that in the first year of office, 30 police posts in crime hotspot areas to make the police closer to communities would be established. I remember in a subsequent budget speech there were 30 mobile police stations were going to be prepared and sent around the country. The promise was repeated in 2017. There was a promise that every minister would be given a job description letter with clear performance targets. I don't believe that has been kept. There was, I mentioned already, the promise to merge the Civilian Oversight Authority with the Police Service Authority. I don't know whether I should call it one promise or two, because it has been made twice. Not kept. We had the promise that the security forces would not be reduced in St. James and in the areas. Not kept. The gap between promises and performance too great. Mr. Speaker, despite the official narrative, the fact is that it is clear that there is another reality that is being experienced by the people of the country. The direction that is being followed does not give us hope that the inequalities that exist and the marginalization that so many feel is being reversed. It does not sufficiently ease the burden of the tertiary students. There is not sufficient hope for the emerging professionals. The fact is, the budget does not offer relief for the middle classes or the consumers who are experiencing the hardship of now. There is a better way. That better way would fight the scourge of crime on three fronts: lessening of inequalities, the expansion of opportunities, a more effective crime plan. There is a better way that prioritizes micro, small, and medium-sized businesses in the country. There is a better way that prioritizes the rights of the rural farmers to move forward. There is a better way that provides meaningful, inclusive growth and yields better salaries with real benefits and prospects for our people. A better way can only be taken by a moral leadership willing to take on the scourge of corruption and to hold itself accountable. By the grace of God and the support of the people, we will follow that better way, build a national consensus, attack inequality, and reverse ideas of trickle-down. Together we can build a Jamaica that works for all and not just for Together we will chart a better path to a nation where equality, justice, and fairness are the foundations on which lasting prosperity can be built. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and God bless Jamaica.